with respect to other pathogens during production, processing, and packaging, salmonella obviously is probably the first one that comes to mind, simply because, and at least the thought process is, if we can control salmonella, in many instances, the controls for salmonella would also control other pathogens of interest.
Welcome to MeatsPad. In collaboration with the American Meat Science Association, it's a platform dedicated to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the global meat industry. On each episode, you'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from meat specialists and professionals about the whole meat industry. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Meat Export Federation, Ultrasource, equipment and supplies for the meat and food industry, Viscofan collagen casings, the best alternative to animal gut casings for a better taste and sustainable sausage making, EFA, slaughter and meat processing tools.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. This is your humble host, Phil Bast, here up in wintry North Idaho at the moment. And I'm reaching all the way across the country to a guest we've had in the past, Dr. Jonathan Campbell at Penn State University. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, so Dr. Campbell and I, a few years back at my previous life, we worked together on a little bit of salumi research, and I would say that of folks out there looking at pathogen reduction in salumi research, Jonathan is probably top of mind. And not just salumi, but pathogen reduction in processed meats. And so I wanted to have him back and talk a little bit about some of the previous work that's been done, and maybe give a few ideas to our processors out there who are either making or thinking of making items in the salumi category. And so first off, let's remind the audience, if you would, what is salumi and salami, and what's the difference, and let's go from there.
Yeah, it's great. So again, Phil, thanks for having me. This is a topic that is very, I'm very passionate about it, mainly because you have to wait and have patience to find out before you're able to solve problems. And a lot of other products that the meat industry produces aren't that way. You get kind of a result fairly immediately. At least, if you do something with a fresh meat product, you're going to know pretty quickly if something is wrong with it or have some consumer complaint pretty quickly. But many of these products take so long, weeks, months, or even in some cases even years to produce. So that's why it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And there's always someone out there that wants to challenge the current system and do something fairly unique as ingredients and technologies changes. The questions around food safety with these artisanal style products change. So that's why this is important. And you'd asked me kind of what the difference between salumi and salami is. Funny story. I went through my tenure review several years ago, almost 6 years ago now, at Penn State. And one of the administrative assistants said, "I'm really concerned about your packet being approved because you misspelled the word salami at least 20 times in this document." And I couldn't help but laugh. And she goes, "This is not funny." I said, I'll come up and work on it and fix it. We'll talk about it." So great question. Salumi is just simply an Italian-based word that means deli meats. And the same with, if you may have seen in perhaps very popular in everything from breweries to bars, restaurants, white table establishments, charcuterie boards. And charcuterie is the French version of that term, which just simply means delicatessen or cold cuts or deli meats. One of the things that disappoints me the most is when I see charcuterie boards or salumi boards that have no meat on them.
Right. Yeah. Cheese and pickles, right?
So that's disappointing. Sure. But that's kind of my role in this, and why I like to ask tough questions about these types of products.
Yeah. So, well, and I too have a passion for this. I grew up with it. I didn't even know that you could buy salami at a grocery store until I kind of got into high school and college. We grew up around it and making it in the garage, and we won't get too far down that road because I'll probably implicate my family in a number of infractions. But it's a salted meat. That's the sal part. It's and salt and meat have been a marriage made in heaven for a very long time in society, in civilization, and it's a great way of preserving meat. And that's the history of it all behind why we even have these products to begin with. Prior to refrigeration, regular refrigeration especially, is this was the way that folks used to preserve meat. And I make the argument that we've been doing this for thousands of years, with pretty good regular success. However, we also need to keep in mind that there are always going to be potential challenges that will come about, that could pose a food safety risk. And so, with that, first off, could you identify a few of the bad guys, the pathogens that we are going to target in salumi processing, especially some of our salumi that are uh, uh, um, not whole muscle. So we're talking about salamis in this case.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest challenges is from the regulatory side is, as new scientific information comes out, one of my favorite F words to use is FSIS. And I really value the relationship that both academia and USDA have with one another, but they look at the science that we put out, they evaluate it, and their job is to make the best decision possible for all the consumers, at least in the United States. Perhaps there's an international problem there as well with exported or imported product, but certainly that's their job. And so we have to be mindful of that. So as regulatory decisions and policies and actions change, so does the science in our process. But when we think about pathogens that could make individuals, at a worst case scenario, unfortunately loss of life could occur. There are ones that are really bad and ones that certainly need to be addressed. This all really starts with our raw materials and our process. And so one of the first pathogens that we think about, especially in our swine species, would be some of the parasitic pathogens. And we often miss those. We jump straight to the really bad ones like E. coli 0157, H7, and other Shiga-toxin E. coli's, or Salmonella, or Listeria. But let's start at the beginning. And so that really starts with our raw materials. In some cases, having certified raw materials for parasites, specifically Trichinella spiralis, or maybe even one that is more overlooked than the Trichina guidelines is Toxoplasma gondii. And that's an instance where the house cat, the common house cat, and we have a lot of feral cats all over the United States, and in many areas, they may be more prevalent than others, but the house cat is the main reservoir for that particular parasite. And so if we were housing livestock in areas where there could be a feral cat problem or even a domesticated cat problem, that could be a source of a unintentional parasite that livestock could be become contaminated with. And so having good manufacturing practices in place, certified suppliers or processes that are going to address those parasites is step one. The second would be, at least in the ones that you mentioned that are ground, like our salamis and other types of products, many of those go through a fermentation process, whether it be a natural fermentation process. Most companies that are producing these types of products don't do that. They're relying on a good starter culture. And many of those starter cultures have multiple types of good microorganisms that are doing very different tasks inside that sausage as it's being fermented and then later in a ripening stage. But we certainly subject that raw meat product to a temperature where toxigenic Staph aureus could become a problem.
Yeah.
Now, most individuals that are healthy, those that aren't immunocompromised or individuals that are pregnant or very old or very young, I do find now that my definition of very old changes about every 10 years as I get older. 5 used to be old, now it's, approaching 80. So
Right.
that football kind of changes down the field a little bit. But anyway, on a more serious note, staph toxin produced by staph, we could kill off the microorganism through the entire process. But again, that toxin could remain and could make someone very sick. Those individuals that aren't immunocompromised, you would have one of the nice things about a foodborne disease, if there is one, is that that particular foodborne disease happens very rapidly after consuming that toxin. And generally healthy people get over it pretty quick. And so we find that toxigenic food poisoning from staph specifically oftentimes goes underreported because people think, oh, I just had a stomach bug or something, and 24 to 48 hours later, I'm back to normal.
Yeah.
So you may or may not know that you consumed something that had that. So is it a problem? Well, yeah, certainly those folks that are immunocompromised may have a more severe outcome and have to have some sort of hospital treatment, generally fluid therapy, because you're generally not dealing with something that's alive, it's causing an infection inside your body. You're dealing with something that particular microorganism produced in the food.
Right.
And so even if we cook that product, that toxin is heat stable, and we can address that simply by taking good manufacturing practices to measure the the pH drop during that fermentation in a set amount of time. And that process we refer to as degree hours of fermentation. And so you can calculate it based off of the temperature that the sausage was fermented at. And I'll use 75 degrees Fahrenheit as an example. Now, staph does not produce toxin below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So that math equation is simply the temperature of fermentation minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit times the number of hours that you reached a certain pH. And in our instance, our target for that from a good manufacturing practice and food safety practice is a pH of 5.3 or less. And the reason for that is toxin cannot be produced at a pH of 5.3 or less. And so if we can control those items, which are easily controlled and monitored, so if something is if a deviation does occur from that particular type of fermentation, we don't put that product into consumers' hands.
Yeah.
And that's really the whole premise behind hazard analysis critical control point system to begin with. So this is just another segment of that and more specific to salami.
Since 1883, Ultrasource has been a trusted supplier to the food industry. Ultrasource provides superior kill floor, processing, packaging, and labeling equipment and operational supplies.
With respect to other pathogens during production, processing, and packaging, the top ones that really come to mind, salmonella obviously is probably the first one that comes to mind. Simply because, and at least the thought process is, if we can control salmonella, in many instances, the controls for salmonella would also control other pathogens of interest. So Salmonella enterica would probably be one of my top ones for all species of salumi, and in this case, salami in a ground product, sausages, for instance. Those Shiga toxin E. coli that I mentioned. So E. coli 0157H7 and the other 6 Shiga toxin E. colis. Certainly, we realize that more prevalent in a product like ground beef. Consumers may be aware of ground beef recalls when a plant unfortunately has to recall ground beef products that are contaminated with that. And that's just simply a regulatory compliance issue. So if ground beef tests positive for any type of Shiga toxin E. coli, that's going to rise to the level of a recall
Sure.
by that company. And it would for these types of products, especially the ones that contain beef. Now, the misnomer, in my opinion, is we assume that those Shiga toxin E. coli are only associated with those beef species, and that's just simply not the case, especially in a multi-species production facility where you're doing both beef and pork, for example, in that same facility. The chance and potential contamination could occur. Again, our food safety practices, our sanitation practices, and our procedures are how we address all of these types of pathogens. Now, a rare one, because salumi that is produced with poultry species are rare, but growing in popularity. Anybody who may be of Italian origin that is a diehard prosciutto fan, don't listen to what I'm about to say. Just pause this real quick. But prosciutto made from duck breast is an excellent product.
Yes,
It mimics that product, and I can produce it in 3 to 4 weeks versus, in some cases, 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
So I realize that really steps on the toes of many hardcore carnivores, if you will, and lovers of that type of product, but it is a viable source for making a product like prosciutto. Now, luckily for us, it's a whole muscle product, so it's a little bit easier to get through the regulatory process in some ways. But duck has also been utilized to make salami products. And so we cannot forget Campylobacter species, the Campylobacter genus of pathogens in those poultry containing items. So although it's more of a rarity, but it certainly would be something that should be addressed specifically from a regulatory side of things. Now, the wonderful thing about these types of products is we don't want to cook, in many instances, these types of products during the production process. And the consumer is also not going to rely on any type of further preparation of these types of products. It is a deli meat. It is a cold cut. It is going to be eaten at probably at least room temperature or colder. And so no heat treatment or thermal process is going to occur to rely to reduce pathogens that, you mentioned salt and meat have been married for a long time. Well, fire and salt and meat go together quite well too.
That's right.
I kind of want a steak now, don't you?
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, because these products are what we consider to be ready to eat, the impact and care that we need to take in these products, especially when slicing these products, the concern for Listeria monocytogenes is quite great.
Right.
And that would be true for any type of meat product that we consider to be ready to eat or no further preparation by the consumer would occur.
Yeah. Wow. That you've said a lot, and I really appreciate you starting at the product at the raw product level, because sometimes we don't even consider that. We almost take it as just an assumption that everything's going to be great. We're starting out with this and we're just going to do our thing. But the reality is, and something that I bring up to a lot of my classes, is that because salumi especially has become this very artisanal item in a lot of different avenues, and especially in the restaurant category, that the folks making these are trying their hardest to maybe go all the way back in time to heirloom heritage breeds that are maybe being raised outside. And now again, I'm going back to pork, and there's a reason why we don't have trichinum concern in fresh pork at a traditional grocery store. But we may need to go back and start thinking about that with animals that are kind of going back to that pasture run situation, because that's where they're going to pick up those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just simply because they, the potential to be exposed to various types of parasites is much greater.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that it's impossible in confinement indoor type of animals, but the risk is certainly greater, and you have to value what that risk is and address it appropriately.
Right, right. Good thing though that we do have some rather simple ways of overcoming that and getting into, as you mentioned, the certified pork. And for those who are out there considering this, is it's a freezing step essentially, and I know that sounds like a little odd that you're going to go and buy frozen meat to make some specialty item later on, but we do have to consider these parasitic situations going forward. And so I really appreciate that. You also have laid out some really great guidelines as far as measurable steps in the process. So you mentioned like the temperature controls that we can bring into play and manage some of these pathogens of concern. You mentioned the pH, which, I mean, come on, guys, 5.3, that's not hard to achieve, really. It's under normal circumstances, meat's already 5.6, 5.4, and so it's just a subtle adjustment through the fermentation process. Now, I'm also not going. I'm not as cavalier to say that this is super easy to do. It's you still need to follow the right processes, and that's why we have folks like Dr. Campbell on to be a resource for folks out there. And if you do need more information, I mean, there's a good body of work that Dr. Campbell and his team have put out in the meat science community that I believe in most cases are open access on, which means free online for you to use, but also reach out to folks like Dr. Campbell to talk more about these specific processes. And so so you mentioned the pathogens of concern, and I really appreciate all that. I think that's really important that we touch on those. What about let's wrap this conversation up on a really high note. And what are some things to continue to think about as far as maintaining quality when making salumi items and processed meats for that matter?
Yeah, and my colleagues at Fresno State, North Carolina State, and Wisconsin, the four of us get together annually and teach the Salumi 101 course that's offered through the American Meat Science Association.
Mhm.
Why? All four of us are very passionate about producing high quality items like this, and you will hear all of us at some point during those 3 days talk about junk in equals junk out. So it starts at the raw materials, it starts at your suppliers, and if you have a question about quality of anything going in, it's not going to get any better on the other end. It's only going to be exacerbated and exponentially worse. So that's really where it starts, and also having those good foundations of things like sanitation in the production facility, and then even more highly sanitation areas when we get to the packaging side of things, because the risk from environmental contamination could occur.
Yeah, we got to think about this, that from a pathogen food safety control standpoint, these bugs that we encounter and are trying to control, they're in the environment. We just got to make sure that we're conscious of it, that we're starting with a quality product to begin with that is already maybe at a very clean and low load to begin with, but then also from the quality standpoint, I mean, every day and right now we're interacting with, we're breathing in microorganisms that they're not going to harm us, but they can potentially get in with the product and cause some weird things to occur. And so if you want that consistency, you do have to maintain a very, very clean environment when you're working with these things. Now, if I go back to my childhood growing up, our inoculums that we used to introduce were just our dirty fingernails, obviously, but we didn't even think about buying cultured lactic acid producing bacteria, but ultimately it comes back to that, and I'm not trying to gross folks out there, but just realizing that we encounter these microorganisms day to day. They're good microorganisms in many cases, and as long as you do have that consistency and control, everything's great. I will say that we, growing up, not every batch was great, and it probably had something to do with some of that additional environmental microorganisms that may have gotten in and changed the end product. And so from a commercial standpoint, stick with what we know: clean environment,
Yep.
consistent product, high quality product coming in, and you're going to have a happy customer in the end.
Yeah, that's true. And, with respect to the pathogens, certainly we're surrounded and I can't have a lot of the food that we produce without microorganisms. So they are essential to basically our survival,
Yep.
if you think about it. And but with respect to pathogens, one of my mentors, Jim Dixon, one of his famous sayings, or at least it was stuck with me, whether it's famous or infamous, I'm not really sure, but finding pathogens is not like finding a needle in a haystack. It's like finding a needle in an entire field of haystacks. And so which hay bale do we look under? And picking the right one doesn't necessarily, that's a scientific guess at best.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
we have to continue be very vigilant at trying to find those pathogens so that we can, hopefully get rid of them in the finished product.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, that's a great point. And it's a testament to just how great of a meat industry we do have, where it is hard to find these pathogens in many
Yes, it
cases,
is.
but it's very important that we do also understand them and assume that they're there so that we can control for them for the folks that are definitely the higher risk folks, the very young, the very old, the immunocompromised, et cetera. So.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Campbell, thank you so much again for joining. This is great. I'm sure I'll have more thoughts pop into my little brain, and I'm gonna reach out to you again because I just love this discussion. And gosh darn it, I need to go and visit with you guys at one of these Salumi 101s.
You
You
We'd
know,
love to have you.
mostly because I just want to sit and eat all the delicious stuff that comes from those. And just to reiterate one more time, that is a great program through the American Meat Science Association. I believe there's links on the website at meatscience.org that you can go out and find that particular program. And so if you have interest, please sign up for that. So
Yeah, some people balk at the cost of it, but it's expensive to run simply because of the types of materials we are making, number one, and then number two, we have a pretty big dinner one evening that showcases a lot of these types of products, and they're very expensive to
yeah.
to sample.
Well, it's even more expensive to have a recall is the way I look at it.
Right.
And so, it's worth the cost. It's and we got to continue to learn and educate ourselves. And so, yeah, always weigh those benefits to the costs. And I believe that this is one that's definitely worth it. So thanks again, Dr. Campbell, and have a great day.
Hey, thank you.
You bet.